Hello again, fine denizens of the internet. I'm finally able to log into this game once again without wanting to vomit after they removed the degenerate pandering flags on the front of the login screen, at least. Still undecided if I'm going to keep playing this game, but I might just overlay random game footage instead of RuneScape going forward. But yeah, the reason I haven't recorded videos recently is because I haven't been able to play this garbage. And that's fair, right? I think, it's just what it is. I freaking couldn't log in. It's the same reason why I won't enter a building that has like a pride flag on the front of it or something, right? Same sort of ordeal. And that's everyone's right, at least currently it is. Who knows going forward how things are going to go. But today I would like to talk about free speech extremism again and how we need to reclaim the N-word. So, a lot of people are going to make the argument that free speech is, has a limit realistically, and I just simply disagree. Any sort of policing on free speech, period, is, a logical fallacy by definition. So why do I say that? Because you can't, causation doesn't correlate with, effect, etc. Just because someone says something does not in fact mean that someone else is going to take action. Just because you yell fire in a crowded movie theater or whatever doesn't mean you're going to trigger a stampede, nor should you suffer the repercussions of triggering a stampede. Just as, saying the N-word does not justify people physically assaulting you, even though, a lot of people seem to think it does. And so it's time to, I think another universal truth we need to touch on is it's time to stop the idea of thought crimes in general. Your words are just an expression of your thoughts, and that's in essence what kind of power you have as a human being, is your ability to communicate. The word spell and a magical spell have the same, spelling, very intentionally. The English language is sort of designed that way, where you demonstrate things, you spell things out, and your words are, in essence, power. And when you remove people's ability to use certain words, express certain ideas, you are going down an inevitable path of tyranny. There is no way, if you restrict anyone's speech, period, that you can, avoid eventually ending up in a tyrannical situation. That's just part and parcel of, being a free speech extremist, is understanding that. And if you're examining the world through a lens of universal truth and a lens of fighting tyranny, and a lens maybe of saving the West, right? You have to approach it in that sort of venue. Like, just look at, again, I know the Jason Neely case, I talked about it in detail once before, but, like, just because you, yelp out a death threat does not give someone the right to, physically assault and kill you. Like, you should have to wait before an action is taken, before, you actually act upon it, or else it's a thought crime. Thinking, in Jason Neely's case, that I'm going to murder people if I don't get enough to eat today, does not somehow justify, putting an end to Jason Neely's life, which is the end result of what happened there. That's a thought crime being punished with the real crime. Just the same thing as saying the N-word does not somehow justify, murder. Wearing a Trump hat does not justify murder, even though people on the political left seem to think it is. And if you disagree, then inevitably you're going to end up with tyranny, period. I mean, you don't need to look much further than the burn, loot, murder riots to figure that out. Untold people called for, rioting, which by definition is, not free speech in the United States. Untold amounts of people, including Nancy Pelosi, God knows how many people, called for, riots in virtually every American city, and they happened to the tune of $9 billion of damage and 34 dead. That's not, something that's tangible or whatever, but that is, period, a thought crime if I've ever heard of one. But it isn't prosecuted because we live in a corrupt state, and because we've allowed tyranny to fester, and we are not free speech extremists. You should be able to call for riots, period. You should be able to, call for, like, for instance, in this Chetwood case, a bunch of people on 4chan talked about, sending death threats to this one officer, and God knows who cares where, right? Chetwood, or whatever his name is. Chitwood, however, I don't really care. Like, he's not an important person. He's just going after some, like, fat neets on 4chan to try and get internet famous, and he's also apparently a tranny. Whatever. Who cares? Like, but at the end of the day, by tranny I mean there's photos of him dressed up as a woman. I'm not sure if he's actually identifying as a tranny or whatever. He's good enough in my perspective, at least, just as a correction there. But who knows? But anyways, so you have this tyrannical, deranged sheriff who's going after people for objectively thought crimes. And, legally speaking, you are not allowed to do that on the internet, even if you had Minecraft in it, because we live in a corrupt society. And specifically, he's going after, right-wing people on right-wing spaces. And yeah, so, and the people that are calling Chetwood all of these names, they're like obviously free speech heroes, but it's a pretty dumb hill to die on, I will admit. I think a much better hill is the N-word, where it's a word that's so toxic in society, yet it's integral to our history as Americans, and it's something that you should be allowed to say, period. There is no real justification for it being a banned word or being a word you can't say, other than it might hurt people's feelings. Well, that's a little too bad in the current year. You cannot express an opinion without hurting someone else's feelings. You cannot do anything without it hurting someone else's feelings, period. And that's why, for instance, woke media, which tries to pander to everyone and refuses to hurt feelings, ends up feeling dull, nihilistic, and meaningless, because you cannot express a thought without attempting to hurt someone's feeling. The politics of this, policing thought crime and trying to destroy the American system via that way as well play into it hugely, because if you do not have a universal truth, for instance, nothing you can say should ever be a crime, period, because it doesn't result. It's impossible to determine if the action came from you saying it or not. Just flat out. Even if let's say I yelled bomb on an airplane and the airplane was diverted, or, something happened, whatever. Something horrible like that. I'll let your mind drift to the possibilities, like anything that could possibly arise from saying bomb on an aircraft. All the horrors, maybe, however many dead. That's still not necessarily a thought crime. You cannot prove concisely that, you saying that changed the fate of history. And even if you could, it's still not, it's still something that could be played around. And furthermore, it still is just factually incorrect to try and say that, because those words were uttered, X, Y, and Z happened. Like, even if you're in the room with someone, telling them to, like, let's say you're watching someone on the internet or whatever who's not mentally stable, and you're barking at them to, do X to themselves, and they end up doing X to themselves. That's still the person's decision. At the end of the day, you have to penalize the action, not the thoughts behind the action, or else it's a thought crime. And that's just period. And yeah, it might, I think it will decrease the total number of deaths in the world, just overall, that come from this stuff, because of how many people get killed in quote-unquote self-defense from words, or, whatever have you, like, for instance, the N-word and a lot of other things. And so that's a system by which, going through that route, you will decrease the total number of deaths. And free speech extremism is one of the only ways to save the West. That basically, we need to start setting up universal laws that can't be exploited for political gain in this country like we originally had. We used to have an old set of standards that most people agreed on and were at least somewhat sensible, but that's gone out the window, out the wayside for a while now. So because of that, we need universal sets of standards, like the universal principles I've described. And one of them is going to have to be that, just for the sake of politics, for the sake of the West, if you're actually interested in saving the West, one of them is going to have to be that nothing you can say, period, even belating out the N-word, even doing anything, that is somehow politically incorrect, or anything, just flat out. Causation doesn't equal correlation. Same thing with words. And taking away your ability to say things, trying to limit your speech, is just one of the ways that our society is inevitably teetering towards full totalitarian hellscape. And the only way to avoid that is by, equalizing the political landscape as far as free speech extremism goes. And then there's a few other things that go along with this, where if you want to save the West through this way, you would have to also then, destroy ESG, destroy government's meddling, destroy corporate personhood, destroy fiduciary responsibility in the Federal Reserve. If we could do all of that, I'm pretty sure the country could be turned around in less than a year. But the people will never obviously go for something like that. They're far too brainwashed now by some, God knows what type of horrid propaganda, but it is what it is. But if you wanted to save the West, that would be how I would look about doing it. And, that's a system which, at least universally, is applicable and works. That's it for today. Tomorrow I'll talk about another way to try and save the West, since we're on our positive arc. Besides Jagex, Jagex is a garbage company that deserves to die in a dumpster fire. Whoops.